three major Confederate strongholds, but more so in particular the city of New Orleans. Because okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna touch on a little bit of this. It kind of fits the chronology, but I'm gonna get back to the first battle of Manassas. But this just to add the further context, so I'm gonna go ahead and touch on it. Okay, as far as like Louisiana, right? Okay, New Orleans was considered a very fucking important strategic point at the time, right? Because like I was saying, like as far as April, a lot of shit that happened, this had also happened. This fits the mold. Abraham Lincoln, and the date would be April 16th, if not the 17th. He had instituted a embargo, right, on Confederate trade. So no nation would be able to, like he issued like a blockade on all of their ports. Not just, you know what I'm saying, within the Atlantic, but it also is mentioned within the Gulf of Mexico as well. You know what I'm saying? Which will also include Mississippi. He felt like it would choke up their economy. You know what I'm saying? Because as far as like manufacturing, 90% of all manufacturing took place in the North. Not just that. As far as like the make of weapons and shit like that, for every like 3,400 guns that were manufactured, the South collectively as a whole only manufactured like 100 of that 3,400. You see what I'm saying? So as far as the port at the time, they felt like if the United States or the Union took Louisiana, it would give them a very strong fucking advantage at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, okay, being that South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, Louisiana, from my point of view, if I can remember correctly, I believe they were the second fucking state because the governor of Louisiana at the time was a guy by the name of Thomas. I don't want to forget his fucking. I think it's Thomas Hicks. If not Thomas More. I'm gonna go with Thomas Hicks. If I'm incorrect, you know, I always put in part of the title was actually Thomas More, but I think it was Thomas Hicks. He was the governor of Louisiana at the time. Now remember when I said South Carolina, like they seceded December 20th officially, right? As far as Louisiana, man, January the fucking 8th, the governor ordered the militia, the state militia, to occupy. And again, I'm not forgetting Manassas. This is just context adding to Manassas. As far as the governor of Louisiana at the time, he gave an order for the state militia of Louisiana to occupy Baton Rouge and two major forts there. One called Fort Jackson, which is in New Orleans, by the way, both of these forts. Fort Jackson and Fort Phillip. This is exactly January 8th, 1861. A couple of weeks later, on the 23rd of January, is when he had a convention held. Because he wanted to hurry up and, you know, saying separate from the Union or whatever. He had this convention held, and supposedly only 5% of the population was represented. Because the majority of the state of Louisiana at the time was fucking African American anyway. I think they had over 300,000 slaves. And I believe it was like over 40%. Over 40% of their population was represented by slaves. And 40+%, this is fucking interesting. On the opposite side of the coin, 40+% also consisted of free blacks. So as far as like the white population within the South, and I could not find the specific white population number, and I was salty because I wanted to compare them to the 54th Regiment of Massachusetts. But I'll get to that in a second. The white population was extremely fucking small. But anyway, as far as this convention that Thomas Hicks had on the 23rd of January, they only represented 5% of the population, but they still ended up succeeding. And as far as his logic for it, he felt like You know, if you look at the tradition of the state, it still makes sense. Even though they didn't really represent every single person within the state, it made sense to secede in the first place because this is a tradition that the state was rested upon. Because Louisiana, for example, I think they became a state in 1812, exactly 1812. And at the start of them becoming a state, they were already a slave, like they already had slave populations there when it was just a territory. You know what I'm saying? Again, this reflects the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. So shit, fucking 9 years later, they officially became a state because they have at least 50,000 people. So by the time you got them in fucking 1861, that was his logic. It made sense, you know what I'm saying, for them to secede from the Union because of that in the first place. So they had that convention on the 23rd, and 3 days later, on the 26th of January, is when they officially succeeded from the fucking Union. Not even just that, the state commissioner at the time, it was a guy named George Williamson. He had gave a speech like 2 months after this in March. This is why I was kind of like befuddled at the beginning as far as where to start at, because it's a lot of fucking shit to touch on. And I didn't write this down on paper like I'm gonna start here, you know what I'm saying? But as far as like in March, in Texas, he gave a speech he addressed the Texan convention at the time, and he basically made the same fucking point or whatnot. But, yeah, I guess I got to keep going. Because, like I said, it still fits and it makes sense building up to Manassas. A month after that, in April, I want to say, okay, I'm going to hold off on I don't want to skip too long. I was going to go into a whole different, I'm skipping on that. So it was considered a strategic point. So as far as like General Irving McDowell, that was a part of his overall, I guess you could say, short-term plan to end the war brief, to make the war brief or whatnot. So as far as Manassas, it was kind of like a part of his plan. He wanted, let me see, I think he had entered Manassas with like, because as far as like some of the Union generals that fought at Manassas, you had another guy named P.G.T. Beauregard, and then you had another guy named Joe Johnston. Joe Johnston at the time occupied Winchester, Virginia. And it is mentioned as far as the regiments that he was ahead of, you know, they comprised at least 9,000 soldiers at the time. As far as Beauregard, I believe he had like about 20,000 soldiers under him that he was going to bring to, was it 20,000 or 30,000? 20,000 or 30,000, somewhere around that amount. They were supposed to have brought to this battle at Manassas or whatever, because you know it's a whole collection of different regiments. But as far as going back to Maria Rosetta O'Neill, the intel that she gave to the Confederacy, his numbers were supposed to overall, as far as like the Union, represent, I think, anywhere between 50 to 55 fucking thousand. All right, and of course they was going to enter through this tributary to the Potomac River called Bull Run. Now this tributary kind of like runs down northward, like almost kind of like north-south when you look at the map. But when you look at Manassas, what they call the Manassas Junction, it's east of that, but not too far. But going back to Betty Duval, who, you know, gave the intel as far as what the Union was planning, that's what gave the Confederacy the upper hand. They were expecting these soldiers to cross over the Bull Run River. And on July 21st, when they did that, they were already prepared for them to cross over this river. Now, as far as Joe Johnston, one of the Union commanders, a guy by the name of Pat Robertson, he was supposed to go to where Joe Johnston was at, which is Winchester, Virginia, and kind of like hold him off and prevent him from reinforcing Beauregard. But again, you know, the Confederates, they already knew the plans of the Union at the time. So by the time this guy, Pat Robertson, made it to Winchester, you know, he was super fucking confident. You know what I'm saying? Like, based on what I read, he even sent like a telegraph by the time he got there. And when he got there, he realized that Joe Johnston had already left or whatnot. Now I'm gonna get to the Battle of Manassas. Okay. As far as like the Confederate soldiers, they were kind of like a few miles or whatnot away from the Bull Run River. You know, it was confusing because they was like, when I read this shit, they was like, yeah, they was waiting on the banks of the river. You know what I'm saying? But literally speaking, they were like a few miles away from the shit. So the Union soldiers crossed over. This big clash happened. Eventually, they ended up on this hill called Matthew Hill. I believe, yeah, Matthews Hill, which is where the Union faction ended up on top of, fighting against the Confederates or whatnot. And then you had a crowd within a safe distance that was watching this fucking battle take place, because again, going back to this whole underestimation thing, it was also mentioned in the book that this crowd expected the fucking battle to end quickly, and then these other soldiers, really on both sides, but you know, as far as like the lens of it, they kept on mentioning the Union soldiers. They were super confident that this would be an easy fight. Once the shit had started, chaos erupted. Because as far as like their appearance, they wasn't really in complete uniformity, like as far as like military wear. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was hard, like it got to a point where it was hard to discern who was who. So throughout the day, the battle kind of raged on. They ended up from Matthews Hill. You know, you had a lot of people like Beauregard, for example. You know, there's quotations about him feeling like, because at first, to be honest with you, the Confederates after a while were losing at first. So as far as like Beauregard, he was one of those commanders that was like writing like, oh, this might be my last day and all this little type of shit, you know what I'm saying? As the battle continued on, by the time they ended up to where it was another hill called Henry Hill. This is the opposite as far as the positioning. This hill ended up being occupied by the Confederates at the time. The reason why this hill is called Henry Hill, it was a lady by the name of Judith Henry. Actually, they consider her one of the first casualties of war, you know what I'm saying? I guess you could say, I don't think she was the first person that got killed. She was definitely one of the first significant people from a retrospective look at it. And she was like 80 plus something years old, probably like 88 or 89 years old, but her house was on top of this hill. And this is where the Confederate soldiers occupied. They ended up bringing their cannons on this fucking hill, and they would fire it down into the Union flanks or whatnot. Eventually, they ended up devastating the Union flanks, and because it's another guy named Chatham Roberto Wheat, and he was the head of this regiment called the Louisiana Tigers. And he is mentioned as somebody that fought extremely brave or whatever. Like, he was able to kind of like hold off some of these regiments or whatnot. But by the time they ended up on Henry Hill, this is where this other guy named Thomas Stonewall Jackson got popular. Actually, his real name is Thomas Jackson. He got the nickname Stonewall because when they ended up on this hill or whatnot, and they was fighting against these Union soldiers or whatever. They created like lines or whatnot. A guy by the name of Barnard B ended up shouting Johnston. He was shouting to one of the commanders, Joe Johnston. He was like, Joe Johnston, Jackson is right behind you like a wall or something like that, and that's where he got the nickname from. But to make a long story, as far as this overall battle, the Union ended up getting devastated, and they had to retreat. After they retreated, you know, they ran back across Bull Run or whatnot. Now, President Jefferson Davis, as far as him of the Confederacy, you know, he was happy but disappointed. You know, in retrospect, he kind of took issue with, I believe it was Joe Johnston, because Joe Johnston, you know, based on what I read, he was like the oldest, or really the most, not even just the oldest, but the most experienced commander at the time, and the oldest. And he got a little bit of flack. Like all of their commanders got promoted, but he took a little bit of flack from Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was disappointed in the fact that they didn't fully chase the Union's faction across Bull Run. And it is communicated that both sides are still extremely tired at the same time or whatever. And this guy, Jefferson Davis, made this public. You know what I'm saying? So Joe Johnston felt some type of way about it, and he is recorded as saying, I feel like Jefferson Davis is trying to tarnish my fame as a man or a soldier or something like that. And even though he himself got promoted, he also took issues with what he deemed to be favoritism. He was saying, like, even though he was the most like experienced fucking commander at the time and one of the oldest, and aside from the fact that he did receive some type of promotion, you know, he felt like it was other commanders that wasn't as experienced as he was who got promoted over him. He felt some type of way about that. Now the twist to this shit, right, as far as PGT Beauregard, he also took a little flack too, but it's weird. It's similar to Joe Johnston, but opposite. Like, he felt like the reason why they did not pursue the Union faction across Bull Run is because somehow Jefferson Davis interfered with that. Now, I researched that and I couldn't find no type of real fucking information as to how would that be the case. But overall, as far as this battle with Manassas, the Confederates won, and the Union got hit with like a reality check. Like I was saying, like they felt like it'd be like a piece of cake. Like they'll be able to just run over these, like what I mentioned as far as Irvin McDowell. They felt like they'll be able to kind of like run over these motherfuckers and then eventually go ahead and circumvent the heart of the Confederacy, which is Richmond, Virginia, and then the war would be over like within weeks or some shit like that. But again, as far as like the morale of these soldiers being mitigated from the very fucking start of the battle, you know, they got hit with a reality check and they realized they had to, you know what I'm saying, take this a little bit more serious or whatnot. So that was the fucking battle. Now, as far as like the promotion, on the Union side of the fence, another guy by the name of General George McClellan, he ended up taking that guy's position. He ended up taking that guy Richard Dowell's position. He got promoted as the head of the Army of Virginia, or the Potomac or whatever. So that's the first. So that's one of the first major like failures, you could say, from the Union. And then after that, I think a month after that, going back to Benjamin Franklin Butler, is when he ended up back in Massachusetts for a second. But also touching on the battle with Big and Little Bethel, you know, he took some flack. Like I say, he took some criticisms for that battle. And they were debating, as far as like the United States, Lincoln and the Army, whether to reconvene his commission or whatever. As far as this exact date of the battle with Manassas, that's when they chose to go ahead and let him, you know what I'm saying, like they let him continue his fight in the war or whatnot. But again, a month later, he ended up in Massachusetts. And during that same fucking month, he also was assigned to go to North Carolina, right? And it was 2 forts in North Carolina, one called Fort Hatteras actually, and then another one called Fort Clark. He ended up being successful in taking both of those forts and defeated those people. So that was a little bit of a booster for the Union or whatever. They made a extremely big fucking deal out of it, and he gained a little bit more public fame. As far as Benjamin Franklin Butler, he gained a little bit more public fame. And actually, he took part in those 2 battles before he ended up in Massachusetts, and that's what got him the public fame. Now, when he went to Massachusetts, you know, he had a little back and forth publicly with the governor of Massachusetts, John Andrews, right? As far as the military commission at the time, because John Andrews would choose he would be able to choose what leaders will lead what, you know what I'm saying, as far as these military regiments or whatnot. And Benjamin Franklin Butler had other ideas of mind, like he had a brother by the name of, was it Andrews, I think or was it Quincy? I think Andrews. He had a brother by the name of Andrews. He highly suggested to have him appointed, so they went back and forth as far as that. And then he ended up back in Virginia, as it is mentioned. And I'm gonna say after August, a few months later, in November, that's when he's assigned to go to Louisiana on a mission. But I'm gonna pause right there for a second, and I'm gonna go back to Maria Rosetta O'Neal, all right? Because she's interesting. Now, this going back to the Battle of Manassas, like I say, she was given that information or whatever because she was a spy. People in Washington ended up becoming suspicious, all right? The Secret Service at the time was instituted, right? This is the first time the Secret Service came into being. The head of the Secret Service was a guy named Alan Pinkerton. Now, I want to mention something else because it kind of fits. You know, around this time, the suspension of habeas corpus was also at play. And originally, it was kind of, I ain't gonna say locally, but it was like a suspension that was tailored to a certain region, like from what was it? Was it Philadelphia? I think Philadelphia to Baltimore, and that was in fucking early May, by the way. And then eventually became expanded to fit the whole entire fucking country, basically. We're really Union territory, because this lady that I mentioned, Maria Rosetta O'Neal, she wasn't the only fucking spy at the time, but she was definitely one of the major ones. And you know, there's just a lot of fucking a lot of crazy shit was going on, which also adds to the Secret Service being created. People became suspicious of her, and she ended up, well, actually, before she got arrested, hold on, I got spit. Actually, before she got arrested, she actually caught wind of this suspicion as well. Again, when I researched her, they didn't say exactly how. They just mentioned that she became knowledgeable of this. So she had a daughter at the time. I think her name was fucking, was it Ella? Yeah, her daughter Ella, I believe. And again, if I'm incorrect with the name, not corrected in the title or whatever. Her daughter Ella, she had sent her to live with her older sister, her other daughter actually, in Ohio at the time. Now her name was I'm trying to remember her name because her older sister, well Maria's daughter, but the older sister to Ella, her name was her husband's name was, what was it? Seymour Treadwell Moore. Seymour Treadwell Moore. As far as Cause my fucking name is slipping me. I think it's France. I think it's, what is it? Is it Francine? Francis? It's in the back of my head. It'll come to me lately. I mention it as I continue to go along. But anyway, she had her daughter sent to live with her, but she kept her youngest daughter, who was also named Little Rose, with her or whatnot. So by August the 23rd, now keep in mind, still 1861, all right? Around this same time in August is when Benjamin Franklin Butler not only had, defeated or was successful in taking those forts in North Carolina, Fort Hatteras and Fort Clark, but he had also ended up in Massachusetts at this time, so keep that in mind. Now, the exact day that he left Massachusetts, it's not really noted, but as far as like, a good simultaneous contextual look around this same fucking time, that's when she got arrested. She got arrested exactly on the 23rd of August. And she wasn't placed in jail originally. They had put her on house arrest at this time. And it was other people, like I say, other spies as well. They didn't really denote them, but they all kind of put them under house arrest at her exact address. And publicly speaking, it became known as fucking Fort Greene. What was it? Fort O'Neill or Fort Rosetta or something like that, but it was pretty much nicknamed after her. So as far as like the guy Alan Pinkerton, he wanted to use her as a double spy or whatnot. So he'll have her continue to write these fucking notes and give a little information, but also kind of like he tried to use her as a double agent to beguile Thomas Jordan at the time. Somehow Thomas Jordan ended up catching on to it and he stopped responding to her letters. Now also, just to keep in mind, during her little spy network, not only was she, not only did she have close connections with, I'm gonna call them Union sympathizers as well. People on that side of the fence. She was in communication directly with Thomas Jordan as well as President Jefferson Davis at the time. Like he was sending her thank you letters and telling her she was a good patriot, this and that. She was down for a good cause or whatever. So as far as like when these letters stopped being sent, going back to the media aspect of things, people felt like her treatment was a little too lenient for her to just be on house arrest at her residence. So they ended up transporting her to an actual jail called Old Capitol Prison. Now the date that they transported her, I believe it was January the 18th. By the way, as far as her being on house arrest, they also allowed her daughter to stay with her. That's what really adds to the fury as far as people publicly criticizing, this lenient treatment that she was given or whatever. So they transported her to this Old Capitol Prison. January the 18th. She was there for about 4 months. Up until May the 31st, and then they released her. Now this is again, I'm like, what the fuck? Because you had all kind of people being beheaded and all kind of extra shit, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm jump the gun for a second. Even on the side of the Confederates, you know what I'm saying? Like, who was it? The Secretary of War on the side of the Confederacy, a guy named, I think James Seddon. I know his last name was definitely Seddon, Seddon. He had made an early declaration in April of, it's kind of going a little further. I think it was like in April of 1863 that any black soldier that got caught, they'll get beheaded or whatever. I could reference other shits too, but as far as her treatment, it was extremely lenient to that. They let her out of prison after 4 months. And not only did they let her out of prison along with her daughter, they actually transported her to Fort Monroe. From Fort Monroe, she, garnered her own little transportation or whatever, and her and herself went to Richmond, to the heart of the Confederacy at the time. So her punishment was extremely light. And it didn't stop there as far as her. Again, I'm going to get back to Benjamin Franklin Butler in a second. Not only that, when she went to Richmond, you know, she was like, you know, paraded as a fucking hero, you know what I'm saying? And she still continued in this fucking war, and she went from being a spy, you know, under, or while, you know, staying still on Union ground, to now that she's on Confederate ground, she became an ambassador, you know what I'm saying, to try to garner support from Europe itself. This is why I think this lady is so fucking interesting, because out of all the exotic shit that I heard throughout my life, I had never heard her name before.